The courthouse was supposed to be a place of justice, but on this particular morning, something completely unexpected happened. Judge Marcus Reynolds, a respected black judge known for his fairness and integrity, was making his way inside when he was suddenly stopped at the entrance. The officer, a young white cop new to the security team, blocked his path, demanding identification. At first, Judge Reynolds chuckled, thinking it was just a misunderstanding. But as the officer's tone grew firmer, the air in the room shifted. The tension was unmistakable. People in the lobby slowed their steps, sensing something was off. The judge calmly reached for his ID, but before he could present it, the officer did something that left everyone in shock. What happened next was so unbelievable that even those watching couldn't believe their eyes. Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't forget. Judge Reynolds stood still, his eyes locked on the officer, who now had his hand resting near his holster. A hush fell over the lobby as a few people nearby watched in silence, unsure of what was happening. The judge, always a man of patience, spoke calmly. "Is there a problem, officer?" His voice was steady, but there was a hint of disbelief in his tone. The officer squared his shoulders. "You need proper clearance to enter," he said firmly, glancing at the judge's expensive suit, but showing no sign of recognition. Judge Reynolds slowly pulled out his ID, holding it up for the officer to see. But instead of simply checking it, the officer hesitated. Something about the way he looked at the judge felt off, like he was searching for a reason to question him further. The people watching shifted uncomfortably. No one said a word. Then, just as it seemed the situation might settle, the officer did something that no one saw coming. The officer took a step closer, his eyes scanning the judge's ID as if searching for something to dispute. A long pause hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension. "This could be fake," the officer muttered under his breath, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. A murmur rippled through the lobby. People exchanged glances, unsure of whether to step in or stay silent. The judge inhaled slowly, his years of experience in the courtroom teaching him to remain composed even in the most heated moments. "I've worked in this courthouse for over 15 years, Judge Reynolds said, his voice still controlled. "If you take a moment, I'm sure someone here can confirm who I am." The officer's jaw tightened. Instead of acknowledging the judge's words, he reached for his radio. "I need backup at the main entrance," he said, his voice clipped and professional. A security guard nearby hesitated before stepping forward. "Officer, that's Judge Reynolds," he said cautiously. But the officer ignored him, eyes locked onto the judge. It was as if he had already made up his mind about something deeper than just an ID check. And then, with a move that sent a ripple of disbelief through the room, he placed his hand on the judge's arm. A collective gasp filled the space. No one dared to move, but the look in Judge Reynolds' eyes had shifted. Not anger, not fear, just a quiet, knowing disappointment. Something bigger was at play here, and everyone could feel it. But the question remained, what was really happening? And why? The room felt frozen in time. Judge Reynolds didn't flinch, but the weight of the moment was pressing down on everyone. The officer's grip tightened just slightly, a move that didn't go unnoticed. The security guard, now visibly nervous, stepped forward again. "Officer, please," he urged, his voice laced with caution. "This is a mistake." But the officer wasn't listening. His radio crackled with a response, but he barely acknowledged it. His focus remained locked on the judge as if he were waiting for an excuse, waiting for resistance. But Judge Reynolds gave him none. Instead, the judge's voice remained steady. "You know who I am, do you?" It wasn't a question of arrogance. It was a statement of reality. The officer blinked, his expression unreadable. But something flickered across his face, doubt, realization, or maybe something deeper. The tension in the room thickened as footsteps echoed in the hallway. More officers were approaching. Whispers spread among the onlookers. Some pulled out their phones, their screens glowing as they recorded what was unfolding. Others stood frozen, caught between wanting to intervene and fearing the consequences. The security guard's face was pale now, his hands clenched at his sides. "Sir," he tried again, more forcefully this time, "you need to let him go." The officer didn't move. Judge Reynolds remained calm, his gaze unwavering. But then, in the midst of the silent standoff, something happened that no one was prepared for. The courtroom doors swung open, and a familiar voice rang out, a voice that changed everything. The heavy courtroom doors swung open, and the sound echoed through the tense lobby. All eyes turned as a tall man in a dark suit strode in with authority. His voice rang out, cutting through the thick silence. "What exactly is going on here?" The officer stiffened, his grip loosening slightly on Judge Reynolds' arm. The man approaching was none other than Chief Judge William Carter, one of the highest-ranking figures in the courthouse. His piercing gaze landed on the officer, then shifted to Judge Reynolds, instantly understanding the situation. For a split second, the officer hesitated. The weight of his actions was sinking in, but it was too late to backtrack. More officers had arrived, standing behind him, waiting for direction. Some exchanged uncertain glances, realizing that this wasn't just an ordinary ID check. It was quickly turning into something much bigger. Judge Carter stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Officer, do you even know who you just put your hands on?" His words sent a fresh wave of unease through the room. The officer swallowed hard but remained silent. He had been so sure of his authority a moment ago, but now, under the gaze of two powerful judges and a crowd of onlookers, his confidence was unraveling. Then, another twist. A woman's voice, sharp and commanding, broke through the moment. "That officer isn't supposed to be here." Heads turned as a courthouse administrator stepped into view, holding a clipboard with a concerned expression. "There was no scheduled security rotation today," she continued. "Who authorized you to be stationed at this entrance?" A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Judge Reynolds' expression shifted slightly, his sharp legal mind already piecing something together. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something deeper was at play. But before he could speak, the officer took a step back, his hand still hovering near his holster. And then, without warning, he made a move that sent the entire room into chaos. The officer suddenly reached for his radio, his movements sharp and urgent. "I need units at the main entrance now," he barked. The tension in the room snapped. The other officers shifted uneasily, unsure whether to follow his lead or step back. Judge Reynolds remained still, his eyes locked onto the man in front of him. Something wasn't right. This officer wasn't just making a mistake. He was covering something up. Judge Carter's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down, officer." Now, it wasn't a request, it was a command. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, the courthouse administrator stepped forward, holding up the clipboard. "This officer's name isn't on today's security roster," she said, "because he doesn't work here." Gasps filled the room. The officer's face darkened. His hand twitched toward his belt, but before he could make another move, two real courthouse officers stepped in, grabbing him by the arms. He struggled for a second, but the fight was already over. Judge Reynolds exhaled slowly, watching as they secured the officer's hands behind his back. The weight of the moment was settling in. "Who sent you?" Judge Carter demanded, his voice low and firm. The officer didn't answer. He stared ahead, jaw clenched, as if he had already accepted his fate. But just as they were about to escort him out, he muttered something under his breath. It was quiet, almost like he was speaking to himself. Judge Reynolds heard it, though. His expression shifted, and for the first time that morning, a flicker of shock crossed his face, because the words the officer whispered changed everything. Judge Reynolds narrowed his eyes, replaying the officer's whispered words in his mind. But before he could respond, the man was led away, his expression unreadable. The tension in the courthouse lobby finally began to ease, though the air still felt heavy with unanswered questions. Judge Carter turned to Reynolds. "Are you all right?" he asked. Reynolds gave a small nod. "I am now." But deep down, he knew this wasn't just an ordinary incident. Someone had sent that officer for a reason. Whether it was a personal vendetta, an intimidation tactic, or something more sinister, he couldn't say. Not yet. The onlookers slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves. The security guard who had spoken up earlier gave a respectful nod to Reynolds before returning to his post. As the judge finally walked toward the courtroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. And maybe, just maybe, it was only the beginning.